In this video we'll talk about dimension styles, and the main reason why we discuss dimension styles is that's what determines the appearance of your dimensions. If I zoom in on some area of this drawing, we can see that the text is very blocky. It's using the TXT font. We're using an arrowhead rather than a architectural tick or some other form of an arrowhead. You can see that we have 4 decimal places in our numbers, that they are decimals. In an angle, we can see that we're to the nearest whole degree. So there are several things about this dimension style that we may want to change. In order to change a dimension style, if I click on the dimension style button at the end of the dimension toolbar, it brings up the dimension style dialog box. Allows us to pick which dimension style we want to change. In this case, I'm going to change the one called Standard. In order to change it, we click on the Modify button. By clicking on Modify, it opens up another dialog box that has 7 different tabs across the top. We can change lines, symbols and arrows, text, fit, primary units, alternate units, and tolerances. To start out with, let's change something real simple like primary units. If I change it from decimal at 4 decimal places, let's say I leave it at decimal and change it to 1 decimal place. You can see in the preview to the right that this is an approximation of what the dimension style is going to look like. If I didn't change anything else, I could just say OK and close, and all the dimensions we put in so far change to 1 decimal place. The exception to that is our angle, and if I go back to my dimension style, modify, under primary units over here we have decimal degrees, and if I change that, let's say to 1 decimal place, or let's just for different, we'll make it 2 decimal places, say OK and close, and my angle is now to 2 decimal places while the rest of my dimensions are all to 1 decimal place. Other things that I can change when I go to Modify, under Lines, you have the ability to change things about the dimension lines, about the extension lines. Things about the extension lines you can change is how far does the extension line extend beyond the dimension line. You can change this number that's currently 0.18. The offset from the origin is how far from where you're dimensioning does the beginning of the extension line start. So again, you could change that one. If you went to symbols and arrows, if I changed from closed filled to, let's say, a dot, it's going to change all of my dimension arrows to a dot. Notice if I change the first, it also changes the second by default. I could also change it to a closed blank. A little bit different look, still an arrowhead, but slightly different. Again, if I said OK and then close, it would affect all of the dimensions we've already put in. If we went to text, we've seen before that we could change a dimension, or rather a text style, and change its font. They give us a shortcut to get to the text style, and that's these little dots at the end of the name Standard here. I can click on those dots and it opens up the text style dialog box. We said basically the only thing we change in this one is the font, and if I wanted it to be Arial, then I could find Arial in here, select it. The preview shows us what it'll look like. I can then say Apply and close, and now it's going to use Arial for the font, and let me go ahead and close that and see the changes so far. So again, we have the open arrowheads rather than closed, and we're now using the Arial font instead of that TXT font with our standard style. Back to our dimension style, modify again. Under text we have some other things that we'll talk about when we get to an architectural drawing. Under fit, we have things like the fit options and text placement. With fit options, it says if there isn't enough room to place both the text and the arrows inside the extension lines, like we have in this case over here with 1.2, both the arrowheads and the text fit inside, what do we want to put outside, or what do we want to fit? It says the first thing to move outside is either the text or the arrows, whichever makes the best fit. Move the arrows out first, move the text out first, move both the text and the arrows each time if it doesn't fit. Always keep the text between the extension lines and suppress arrows if they don't fit inside. Below that we have text placement. It says when the text is not in the default position, put it beside the dimension line. Another alternative is put it over the dimension line with a leader. In other words, a little arrow or a little line that goes towards the text from the dimension. Another possibility is over the dimension line without a leader. The most important thing under fit that we can talk about is this thing over here called use overall scale of. There's some different ways to go about this, but in this class we're always going to use this number, and if it's going to be plotted at 1 to 1, we'll set this number to 1 generally. If something's going to be plotted, say 1/10 its normal size, so it's going to get shrunk down to 1/10 its size, that means already it's 10 times too big to fit on the paper. If it's 10 times too big, we better make our dimensions 10 times too big also, so that they match the object, and then they get shrunk down together in the plotting process. They get shrunk down by the same factor. We'll talk about this a little bit more when we talk about an architectural dimension. I can also go to primary units. We've seen that we can change the precision, either under the linear units or under the angular units. But we can also change here to architectural, engineering, scientific, fractional. We'll leave this one at decimal for now and change it to architectural in the architectural drawing. We don't change this measurement scale. This is only used when something is drawn out of scale. Let's say we had a detail on a drawing where the rest of the drawing was all drawn at 1 to 1, but I had a detail that was drawn 4 times bigger than that for emphasis. If it was drawn 4 times too big and I go to dimension it, all the dimensions will have a number on them that's 4 times too big also. So in that case I could change the measurement scale to 0.25, and that would scale the number back to the correct number. You can try that and see if that works for you. Let me know if it doesn't. You can also suppress any leading zeros. So if something says 0.5 and you just wanted to say 0.5, you could say suppress leading zeros. Trailing zeros. If I had 100.0000 and I just wanted to say 100, I could suppress all trailing zeros also. The same thing is true with any angles. Suppress leading or trailing zeros. With alternate units, if I turn on alternate units, I can have both the English measurement and the metric measurement after it. So if I had something that was 1 inch across, when I turn on alternate units, if I use a scale, a multiplier of 25.4, it'll have the normal unit, 1.0, and then the alternate unit, in this case metric, of 25.6 or 25.4. So it puts those in a set of brackets, and I can either have them right after it like we have here, or place it below the primary value. So one goes above, one goes below. If you had drawn it the other way, if you'd drawn it at metric and then wanted to show the metric as 1 and then what the English equivalent would be, you would multiply this by 1 over 25.4. Do the math, and that's what you would put in there. So you could go either way. Again, you have the zero suppression. With this alternate units, we generally don't use them, but if you needed to use them, you can turn this on. You could create your own dimension style just for this, so that you may have some dimensions that need this, some that don't. This would be one way to do it, is have your own dimension style for it. The last thing here is tolerances. With tolerances, you either have no tolerance shown. We can see that the dimension over here is 1.0. If I say do symmetric tolerancing, it says 1.0 plus or minus whatever your tolerance is. If I made this 0.2 for just as an example, it now says 1.0 plus or minus 0.2. So that's our symmetrical. If I say deviation, it says give us the nominal dimension, which in this case is 1.0, and then have an upper value and a lower value that's added or subtracted. So it says stay within 0.2 above or minus 0.2 below. If I wanted those different, if I wanted this to be 0.3 as the upper value and 0.4 for the lower value, we can now see that it says 0.3 and 0.4. If I change my dimension style to use this kind of tolerance, all dimensions in the drawing would have these. That's usually not the case for most drawings. So again, you would have a separate dimension style named whatever you want to call it, tolerances or whatever, and have the tolerances set for that dimension style, but not for all the rest of your dimensions. So we'll leave tolerances alone for the most part. So if I turn off my dimension style or my tolerances here and go back to none and say OK and close, we're back to our normal dimensions again.